afternoon or good morning. No, afternoon. Right, Josh? Where are you?
Depends where you're at. Still
Uh,
morning for me. I'm on
uh,
West Coast time.
well, you need to come east.
I was there. Welcome, Nate. Welcome, Wes.
Good afternoon.
I saw that you tried to get on a little bit earlier, Wes.
Yeah, I'm on Mountain Time, and for some reason I had it at 10 o'clock my time, but then thankfully I have half an hour today, so that's why I joined. And I'm looking at another screen. Barry Relaford is the one that connected me with this group. I was traveling in Europe with my wife and daughter, and I met him, and he's like, "Dude, you need to connect with this group." I mean, we're just he knows what I want to do, and so. So that's how I connected.
Awesome. Well, this session is just open Q&A. People join throughout the hour. Here's Jeff jumping on. But let's just dive into it. Wes, what have you got? What are you working on? What's your book idea? Hi, Jeff.
Yes. So just a little bit of background for me. So I'm a CEO of a hospital here in Utah, and leadership. Leadership is really important to me in every aspect of what I do, not just here at the hospital, of course, in every other aspect. I've developed a basic template for 4 different leadership training courses already, and that I've used with my own team here. I'd like to utilize those and then at some point publish those in some form or fashion in the future. So to be able to do leadership training, consulting, public speaking, but a lot of it's really based on training because I train with my team here and you have used them here. But essentially, the first training is around servant leadership. The second training is around becoming self-actualization, and those are actually the next 2 trainings. And then the last one is around performance. Is what are the factors that go into performance, and how do we use, of course, performance to elevate the entire team? But fundamentally, though, the becoming, the self-actualization is really what drives performance. So when you become your best self, that's when you can really increase your performance. So that's at a high level where I'm at right now. Now I have a lot of other ideas and I have the other things that I want to do in the future, but that's core. Those are my babies, my brainchilds at this point.
Gotcha. So you've got this pre-existing content. You've tested this within your hospital, it sounds like.
Yeah, I have.
Well, that's great. You're ahead of a lot of people because you have, well, a lot of people come and they're like, I want to write a book, but I don't know what I want to write. Help me figure it out. You already know the content and you've already tested it, which is fantastic. Do you see this being a book that you would use currently within the hospital, or is this more future looking towards what you might do afterward?
Yeah, it's future to what I'm going to do afterwards. Yeah. I mean, I could use it. I could use it now, but this is more what I mean, I'm not going to be a CEO of a hospital for the next 20 years. That's not part of my career path. It's more of the next probably 3 to 6 years continuing in this type of professional role, but then transitioning at some point full-time more into other things that I want to do, including, again, leadership consulting, et cetera, et cetera.
So what's your timeline for wanting to get this book out?
2026 right now. Okay. So it's a little far out, but that's at this point what I've wanted to do.
Gotcha. And so the content that you have, what form is it in? Is it presentations? Is it stuff that you've written down? Is it
simple Word doc? Very literally, just the simple Word doc. And right now in the courses that I've developed, it's essentially 1 or 2 pages at maximum, and then from there, like I've used that as my course training with my team in our leadership meetings. And so it takes, a couple hours to go through the exercises and the discussion of what I'm working to teach with the team. So that's where it's at right now.
Oh,
now,
great.
I've debated about that. I mean, they're only 1 or 2 pages, and I'm like, how much of a book do I, make out of this stuff? Like, that's a question for me at this point.
Got it. What other questions do you have? How can we help you?
No, I have my timeline, I have my what, so I don't have anything right now. I mean, when I talked with Barry, he said, look, I mean, these are like-minded people that are working to publish. So just jump on, see what people are doing, and just go from there. So I don't have anything else right now at this point. Just I'm also open to learn and how people do this and how they've done this, and how do I successfully at some point do it as well.
Cool. Did you have a chance to download the workbook yet?
I have. In fact, I'm pretty sure I did the other night. So yes,
Okay.
I haven't looked at anything yet, but I think I have actually downloaded it.
Great. That's where I'd start, given what you've told me, is just dive into that and take a look at it and see if it sparks some ideas about how to make progress right now. It sounds like you've got a lot there. It sounds like the next step might be creating that outline and figuring out, what do I want for an outline in this book? What material goes in? What stays out? How do I want to organize it? What order is everything going to be in? Sounds like that might be the next step for you. But I think if you dive into the workbook, it's going to spark some ideas and might take you in directions you hadn't considered yet.
Okay, cool. Will do.
Great.
What's the timeline around going through that workbook for most people on average?
Well, let's see, Jeff, you've used the workbook for your book, right?
Yeah, so I was pretty aggressive. Like I've been writing blogs and articles and doing training stuff. So I had a lot of material and I just wanted to kind of get it into a book. But then I used the workbook. I probably started into it in July. Yeah, kind of mid-July, and then wrote kind of the first draft of my book in August, and it's been in editing for the last couple weeks. So anyway, so that's kind of, but
yeah.
I've been in aggressive trying to get this out quick mode.
Yeah, and I would say that's an aggressive timeline. Anything under 6 months is pretty aggressive. And there are people I know who have written a book and published it in 2 weeks. There are people who I know who have written and published a book in 5 years. So it's really up to you and your personal timeline. But under 6 months is tougher. The average for most authors who are pretty focused on the book is usually going to be 9 to 12 months.
Okay, 9 to 12 months. And maybe the only other question that I would have is, I've tested my courses out already in this content with my team here. I also want to do this with other teams. And so within my own network, I haven't yet, but I'm going to start like, hey, I want to do this with your team in my own network. You get like it's beneficial to you. I won't charge you anything, but it'll be a test trial and you're my beta, right? I've debated about how much of that do I do before then I have more content per se, maybe to then use also in a book, pros and cons to that. And any other thoughts?
I think it's never too early to test your content more and get it out there, because the more you test out your content, the more you figure out what works, what doesn't work, and that determines what goes in the book, right? The great thing about a book, or the reason why we buy books, is we believe that it's refined wisdom. It's the best stuff somebody has to offer. And the more you test it, the better the content gets, and the more you deliver on that promise of what the book is for people. Nobody wants to sit down and take 4 or 5 hours or 10 hours to read a book and then find out that the person didn't test out their content and they're revising it still. And so I think the more time you can get with that content out, and it's hard because we want to get the book out fast. We want to get it done. We want to check it off. Years ago, I started researching personal branding and influence and thought leadership. And I thought, I want to write a book about this. And I started working on it and I thought, I'm going to have this book done in a year. Well, that was 2016 or something. And that book I still haven't come out with. So it's been 7 years that I've been researching and refining the content for this book. But now I'm glad that I've spent that long on that book, because it's just gotten better over time and it's become more refined. And even just the other day, I was talking with my wife about it and I was discussing a major change to that content. And I was thinking, I'm so glad I didn't publish this yet, because then I'd be wanting to make this major change, but I'd be stuck. And so I've used that content for coaching, for talks, for training, for all sorts of purposes, and it's just gotten better and better. Not every book needs to be that way, but there are some books where you really want to test that content out a lot before you put it in a book. And so I think if you can get out there and do consulting, talking, speaking, and keep using that content, the more the better, because it's just going to make your book better when you finally put it all down on paper.
Cool. All right. And by the way, I want the personal branding book when you do it.
It's coming. It's called The 7 Systems of Influence, and it will be released. I have no idea when, but we'll see.
Cool.
All right. Well, great to have you
all
here,
I
Wes.
have for today.
Nate, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm nowhere near as advanced as Wes is. I've got some ideas, but I don't have anything solid, and I'm just trying to figure out. I mean, really, my intent in joining today was just to be with like-minded individuals, and hear what I could hear and pick up what I can pick up. And but a leadership book of some sort. I've been thinking maybe go with Patrick Lencioni and do the parable type thing. I'm still, I don't know, and I don't have anything solid, so it's just very it's like trying to pick up a blob of goo right now for me. And I mean, I have no timeline. It's out there in the future, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, we're glad to have you here as well. And Jeff's asking, what's with the sword in the background?
Well,
We all
there's
like to
actually
know.
there's two. There's a bigger one over there. I lived in Spain several years ago. I brought the bigger one I brought home with me, and the smaller one was a gift. So hence the Madrid background and Don Quixote and Sancho right behind my head. Oh.
I recognize the Don Quixote and Sancho Panza there.
Yep.
Speaking of books, that's an amazing book. I just read it a few years ago, and I'd heard about it all my life. I didn't know anything about it, and then I read it, and I thought, this is amazing and funny. And
Sadly, I have not read it, and I want to, because I refuse to read it in English, and reading it in Old Spanish is going to be a challenge for me since it's been 20 plus years since I've used it. But I refuse to read it in English. So yeah, we'll see.
It's such a funny book. My two thoughts as I read it were, there's no way this was written hundreds of years ago. I can't believe people had a sense of humor like this hundreds of years ago. And then my second thought was, how did this guy not get executed for this? Because it's too funny of a book. I would think that people would have been offended by it back then. But anyway, it's a great read. Well, we're glad that you're here too, Nate. And Judith, do you want to catch us up on you? I apologize. You told me the last time we met, hey, I'm committed. I'm going to come to these meetings. And then I canceled the next 2 weeks of meetings. And I felt bad because I was like, oh, Judith just made that commitment. And then I had to disappear because of doctor's appointments and such.
Well, that's okay. You are absolutely forgiven because I'm so grateful for the time that you do share with us. So thank you. And I was in the middle of a proposal and I thought, oh, should I stop and join the group? And I did. So yeah, I'm glad to be here. So my book or books, and I'll tell you why plural in a minute, are based, the book is based on a class I've been teaching in law school for 12 years. And it's also the work that I do with clients and in my professional development coaching. And they're tools and strategies that work for people who are working in high intensity, high demand environments, and they're on the verge of burnout. And they just work. And so the first book, when I first started writing it, it was just like kind of an ABC book where you could just, because the people I work with are so busy, they don't have time to read a book. So it's like, stress. What do I do for stress? Or, I need greater productivity. Look up productivity. And it's this A to Z. And I like it. It's a fun book. But then when I started writing the narrative, the intro to that A to Z, it started turning into its own thing. Like, what is all of this based on? The research and the science and the blah, blah. And the system that I actually use so that I make sure I'm touching all the bases. So that book is about the overarching system. So I'm kind of writing two books at the same time, or it's one book, but it's going to be big. So I don't know. But all that to say, I wanted this book out fast. It's not happening on my timeline. It's happening on its own timeline. And B, there's progress being made. So every time I sit down, progress is made. Sometimes a little bit, sometimes more, but I'm finding it's just happening at its own pace and I can't push it. And I just have to say, Jeff, I just sat down. I always work standing up and I finally was like, I have to sit down. I feel like I need to stand up again watching you, but it's rare that I sit down during these Zoom calls. But here I am. So really just, I appreciate what you just said, Josh, about it can take 12 months because I've been teaching this so long and everything is so coordinated, really refined. I thought I just have to move it from one place to the next, but that's not how it's working. And initially I thought August, I would finish my first draft in August. That didn't happen. So I thought I'll finish my first draft by the end of September. It's unlikely. And so I'm hoping that by the end of this year, it's in the bag, just at least, a rough draft. And then we'll see. But fingers crossed.
Well, one of the benefits of taking your time with your book is that often what happens with people is you gain life experience, and then one day this epiphany happens and you think, I have this experience and I could package this into a book. But as soon as you decide to write a book, your mindset shifts and you start seeing the world differently and you start collecting experiences differently. It's kind of like if you live in Oregon or somewhere where it rains a lot, you might say, hey, it rains a lot. I could catch this rain and I could get a lot of rain. But as soon as you start putting out buckets and cups and pots and pans, then you actually start catching that rain. And it's kind of like when you say, I'm going to write this book, it's like putting those pots and pans and cups out there. You start catching ideas that you never caught before. And so something happens in your business or your organization or your life, and you think, hey, wait a second, that could go in my book. Before you decided to write a book, you never would have thought that. You never would have caught that idea. It just would have floated past you. But as soon as you say, I'm going to write a book, you catch those ideas and new things appear to you. And so there are some people who just decide to write a book and they write it really quickly based on what they experienced in the past. But there are other people who take their time and they catch a lot of ideas and stories. Jeff mentioned when Wes was talking that testing your content out, it gives you more opportunity to collect stories that you can use as case studies and examples in your book. And so there's definitely something to be said for taking your time because it is going to result in a better book ultimately. There are also reasons to get your book written fast, but there are pros and cons.
I mean, at this point, so yeah, that's happening. Like something will happen and I'll go, oh, note, this goes in the book. And then I remembered that, I have all these experiences from my students. Luckily, they have to write about them. And so I don't have to remember them. I can go back and grab those stories and put them in. And so I just made a note to self to write the book first and then add the stories where they make sense. And this idea of picking up relevant events from my environment is really, really helpful. That's happening now. I am seeing it differently. And that said, I am so ready for this baby to be born. Having been through that experience twice, I know what it's like.
Yep. Yeah, there's that great quote by Winston Churchill where I'll paraphrase it, but he says that a book basically starts out as like a lover or something, and then it turns into like a nightmare, and then right when you're about to give up and it's become a dragon, you slay it and fling it out to the public or something. But that is kind of how books go, is they're never perfect. They become a monster, they take over our lives, and finally we get it out there and kill the beast, and then it's done and it's out there. but it's never an easy project.
That's the helpful note. Because I've written things before that just flowed. It's just shocking to me that I think that's been my biggest hurdle, that it's been shocking to me that this has been a challenge, because other books and articles and things I've written always just flowed, and this isn't. So that's a surprise. So I appreciate that.
Here, I found the exact quote. I put it in the chat there, in case you want to save it somewhere to feel better when things are tough as an author. Well, great. Anything we can help you with today, Judith? Any specific questions?
No, just here for a little moral support and a reminder to keep going.
All right, great. Jeff, I don't even really need to ask you where your book's at, because I know exactly where it's at since my wife's working on editing it. But for the rest of the group, how's it going?
Yeah, so Bryn, Josh's wife, has been doing a great job. She started into editing last Monday and already got through the first round of edits, got through the first thing, and already on to round number 2. And so already feel like it's much more refined than it was when I spit it all out the first time. So that's good. And so there are a number of things that I need to just like make final decisions on, like what's my subtitle and stuff like that. And I did decide on a name of an imprint. And I'm curious for your thoughts on this, Josh, on that. Like, I decided on the name, I checked Google and trademark stuff and, you know, the state registry and all that to make sure nothing was there. And I did just add it as like a DBA to my kind of umbrella business name. I don't necessarily need to establish my own business with that name or anything, right? Like, I don't plan on taking money under that name. It's just more of just the imprint name, just so that I can have that as consistent.
Yeah, it's not like you're starting a publishing house, right? So you're not starting a full-fledged business under that imprint. And let me explain this for everybody's benefit. So the imprint is just that little logo you see on the spine of a book. So to grab a random one here, so this was published by HBR Press, Harvard's publishing arm. And I mean, that's a real company. So the logo represents a company, but it doesn't always represent a company. So if you're publishing a book, if you do paperback only, then you're going to publish through Amazon KDP. And if you publish just through Amazon and do their print-on-demand self-publishing option, if you don't choose your own imprint, then Amazon puts on there that Amazon is essentially the publisher or the imprint. And it just looks, I mean, it's not a big deal. It just doesn't look as professional as having some other imprint name on there. And it's so easy to just come up with a name and slap it on there, so you might as well. And so for self-publishers, it's good for us to come up with some sort of imprint name for our books, just to make it look that little bit more professional than having Amazon be the publisher on it. And then you can use that imprint, whether it's on Barnes & Noble or Kobo or Amazon or anywhere else that it shows up. And especially if you're doing a hardcover like this rather than a paperback, Amazon doesn't do hardcover like this, not with a dust jacket. They'll do case laminate, which is where you can print directly on the cover, but there's no dust jacket. But if you're doing a business book or a real book that's not like young adult or kids fiction, then you want to have a dust jacket. That's the more professional option. And to do that, you have to go with a company called Ingram Spark. And with Ingram Spark, when you're setting up your account, they ask you, what's your imprint name? And then you put in that name, and then you can create your logo and put it on there. So for us as self-publishers, we're not running a publishing company, but in a way you kind of are as soon as you come up with that imprint name and put it on the book. So you want to think a little bit about it, come up with a name. For me, it's not how do I come up with a really cool sounding imprint, because I mean, who looks at this logo? Nobody really looks at it. You just kind of see it there, and it's something that you don't pay attention to. But if you pick a bad name, then people will pay attention to it. And we don't want that. So the name of the game is really to just pick something that people just gloss over and they don't notice, but they don't think anything bad, or it doesn't give a negative impression. And so if you look at other imprints, I mean, HarperCollins, Scholastic, those are the big publishing companies, Penguin, Random House. So those are their names. It's just a matter of coming up with something simple, nondescript, that people will ignore, that doesn't attract attention either negatively or necessarily positively. Just something that kind of doesn't mean anything, but people just gloss over it. And then you put that in as your imprint. They do encourage you to actually have a business like an LLC or something set up, but you don't have to set up a new LLC. So for example, Jeff already you have an LLC, I assume, Jeff?
Yeah, so I just added it as a DBA with my state registry, just so that if it was tracked back to anything, like I own it there,
Yeah.
but it's like $5 a year or something. So just like I have the name.
Yeah. And I did the same thing. I have an LLC set up for my book publishing, for speaking. So if I'm doing a speaking event, then I'll invoice people and it goes into my LLC, my personal LLC. So I just added a DBA for my imprint, which is called Taft House, which means nothing. It's just a name that people gloss over. And so that's how you set that up, is you have your personal LLC, you set up the imprint as a DBA of that LLC. And then when you go through Ingram or Amazon and they ask for your imprint, that's what you stick in as the name of the imprint. You come up with a simple logo, you stick it on the spine of your book. That's it, you're done. That's how that imprint process works. Any questions about that from anyone?
No, that's great. I actually have to recuse myself, but maybe a follow-up for next week or another time. What about the content that I've already created? Like, I want to go test it, but I also I want to protect it too. Any thought, I mean, I already what is that trademark? I do have an LLC already, but this is written content. How do I trademark that stuff or other? I mean,
so you can trademark terms. So if you come up with a certain term that's unique to, like, you have a process or a formula, you can trademark that formula or that term that you use. And then you can copyright content. So you can copyright, and really copyrighting content is almost as simple as just slapping a copyright statement at the bottom of your content, because I'm not a lawyer, so don't take my advice too seriously, but basically, if you use the content first and you put it out there and it's obvious when you had it out there, that becomes a standard in law, is who used this first, who had it first. Okay. And now people will copy stuff. There was a case just in the last month with people creating books using AI, using a real author's name and publishing these books in her name. And she's like, wait, all these books are showing up on Amazon in my name. I did not write these books. I have no idea where these are coming from. There are all sorts of things like that. I've had books where I wrote a book and somebody published a summary of my book, and they're selling this book, a summary of 60 Days to LinkedIn Mastery by Joshua Steimle. I'm like, I didn't authorize them to do this. And I contacted Amazon and they're like, yeah, sorry, that's fine. He can do that. It's like, so people are going to copy your content and there won't be a lot you can do about it, but you can establish copyright with it. And at least it gives you the option in case somebody just blatantly steals your content.
Okay. Thank you.
There's a whole field of copyright law though with that. So you can definitely go in more depth with that, but that's the very superficial level of things.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I really wouldn't worry about it too much. I know you need to run, Wes, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. People will automate things to copy your stuff, but people aren't going to take a lot of time to really dig in and then steal your work. And so I prefer to just be on more the open side and say, hey, here's my content, it's out there. And if people copy it, I'm just going to work harder to make sure that my name is everywhere that content is used. And I'm going to lead with my content. Nobody else is going to put the effort into my content. So I compete by just working harder and making sure I'm getting the recognition for the content I put out.
Yeah, love it. Okay, thank you, Josh. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Nice to meet everybody, and look forward to working with you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Wes. Nice to meet you too. All right. Well, we've got a half hour before we normally go into the accountability working session. Anybody have more questions, or should we?
I do. So I was saying I need to finalize and decide on a subtitle. So I'm gonna bring it to the group. I know Josh's opinion on this already. So throwing this up. So my title of the book is called The Intentional Engineer. And so the three things below that, a guide, the engineer's guide, how to, those are the three remaining subtitle ideas that I have. Partially because in other forums, and this is kind of what makes it hard. You kind of want your audience to tell you what they want, but it's been a mixed bag of feedback to a degree. And so there hasn't been a clear winner. I have reasons why I like all of these, but I'm just curious from the group what you see and what you like or don't like in any of these.
What's the book you want to read?
I'm gonna not answer that right now because I want your opinions.
All right, I'll give you, so if you ask 3 people, you're going to get 6 answers. It's just,
Yes.
every person is going to come to it. First of all, your title is great. The Intentional Engineer is fabulous. So that's already interested me. I'm already there. The subtitle is just giving me a little more insight into what the content of the book is going to give me. So and I'm not an engineer or a technical person, but I already can already tell where it's going, and it's interesting. My favorite, if you want me to pick one, is the first one. I think it's the clearest. I think it's the most specific. I think that when we get into words like thrive, now I use thriving a lot because thriving is actually something that I measure and do in my work, but I still think that it's a word that needs definition, and it's ambiguous and means different things to different people. So my thinking is stay away from anything ambiguous or that can mean different things to different people, or that might feel overused, right? Even though that's kind of my area of practice, I already feel like I don't even want to talk about thriving anymore. So I think that your first two are the title's great. And I think that your first one is your tightest and your most direct. And that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Appreciate that.
I'm a technical person. My background's all technical. And I would skip over number 2 because I'm not an engineer. I'm more in between the business and the technical side. So I would skip over number 2 because it's too specific on an engineer. Number 1, okay, I could see myself reading that one. I love number 3, but I think it misses the audience, whereas number 1 really defines the audience.
So that's the thing I do like about number 1. And while I'm writing, I would say the primary focus is engineers, but I do work with a lot of people in that larger kind of technical professional realm. And so adding that in the subtitle expands that audience a little bit. And so I like that. I have some people who really love the passion, purpose, and impact. I actually sometimes have a negative reaction to the word passion. And I don't actually write about passion much in the book. I write about purpose and impact a decent amount. So I might take, but like 3 words feels good. And a lot of people like that. And then what people liked about the third one is that there was an adjective for the career and the life, different adjectives that sort of separated those 2 things. So even if I, to Judith's point, if thriving is too ambiguous, I could put another adjective and, insert, build a blank career. purposeful career or something like that, if I want to keep that sort of wording. You know, something like that. Those are the elements that I've heard that people have enjoyed. There's a lot of things I like about number one. Really states the audience. It feels long to me, but maybe that's okay. I don't know.
I'm seeing a lot of really long subtitles, and I think it's just one of those directions we're going in. But at the end of the day, like I said, there are so many people out there. It's who are you writing this book for? Who is it you wrote the book for, and which book would you read because you wrote this?
Yeah, I do think number one is clear as far as the who I'm writing it for, engineers and technical professionals, and the combination of the intentional and the purpose-driven life and career piece, I think is pretty very much on theme with the whole book. Anyway.
You know, I think that all of us, I mean, it's not to say I haven't changed my subtitle 3 million times. I've got a whole page of them. Because sometimes we see something and it's like, oh, that's the one I want. Like that, it's really exciting and all this stuff. But truthfully, at the end of the day, that's probably going to get less broad attention than your first one, which I think is something everybody can relate to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I like it a lot.
cool.
Yeah, and I still like number one. I just feel like number three could be mistaken for a book that's not for engineers at all. Number two seems to make it clear that it's for engineers, but even still, it's like, is this a book written by an engineer or a book for engineers? Number one is obvious, like this is for engineers and technical professionals. And I feel like that specificity means that I try to put myself in the shoes of an engineer looking at the book. And if I read that subtitle, I know 100% this book was written for me. And there aren't that many books written specifically for engineers, not this type of book. There's engineering books, but life books like this written for engineers, that's kind of a rare thing. And so I think number one does the best job of saying, this is for you. And if I'm an engineer, I would feel like, well, gee, if somebody wrote this specifically for me, this type of book, I almost have to read this just to see what's in it. And number two and number
I'm
three.
an engineer who actually reads books.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, again, like Judith was saying, the subtitle it's not a game changer for the book. It's not like you choose the right subtitle and your book's going to sell twice as many copies as if you get the wrong subtitle, but it matters enough to think about it this much.
Yeah, for sure.
I love
For
that you
sure.
asked 3 people and got 3 of the same votes.
Yeah, that hasn't been true. In my other.
None of us are engineers.
That's okay. Yeah, well, I've asked engineers and non-engineers alike, and it's been an interesting feedback process, and that's okay. It's cool.
Yeah.
In the end, I just get to make a decision.
Right.
Like anything. So.
Right. I mean,
Cool.
You really can't go wrong with any of those because, again, it's not going to be a game changer, but, well, you know what?
I will be personally offended if you don't choose number one now, though. So,
Yeah, thanks.
but that matters.
Thanks, Nate. Yeah. Good.
What about not having, and I like that first subtitle, but what if you didn't? What if it was just the intentional engineer and people are like,
Yeah, I think for me that it would make it harder for, I like having a short title that people can just reference the intentional engineer and that's it. But when you look at the rest of it, you know, you have that like few seconds that people actually like pay attention when they look at a cover and they look at a title, subtitle, and like need to use that for them to figure out like, is this for me? And they're more likely to read a subtitle than they are to read a whole like about section of the book. So I like having a subtitle. I think it's rare that any book doesn't have a subtitle. I mean, it's the exception of the rule. They do exist, but I think it's more rare than common for a book not to have a subtitle.
Yeah, and also to Judith's point, it does seem like subtitles are getting longer and longer. I've seen some best-selling books lately where they have subtitles that are twice as long as your first option there. So I like a short subtitle that's clear and to the point, but there are a lot of people whose books are doing very well with very long, wordy subtitles.
Or it almost seems like sometimes there's two subtitles. Like there, even on the cover, there's like kind of the first subtitle, and then there's like a second thing. Sometimes it's kind of weird.
Yeah. I think people are just turning the subtitle into, hey, this is a paragraph where I can say whatever I want about the book.
Yeah, and how much of that is about the book? And then, I mean, I'm looking ahead to publishing and all that stuff, and getting it on Amazon and like the back end, like the keywords that matter and all those things. And so trying to, you know, there's fun keyword games that you're playing on Amazon all the time and stuff as well. But
that might be driving part of it. People might be seeing a slight kind of search engine optimization reward for including more keywords in their subtitle.
Yeah.
I think also because we are competing with so much information that people are taking the opportunity to say as much as they can in as short a space as possible, so that when people are making a decision, they're doing their best to grab their attention and get all that.
Yeah, it's interesting from the keyword side. I used to sell products on Amazon, and one of the strategies was to just stuff your listing with as many relevant keywords as you possibly could, from the title and everything on down. And maybe that's what people are doing with books.
Yeah. Well, great. Any other questions, Jeff? Anything else we can help you out with?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the other thing is trying to figure out about like structures and creating kind of a marketing plan for when this goes live. And I've started kind of creating the book army and have curated a small list and stuff, but it's like, what do I do with them? You know, and I've been on a bunch of podcasts in the past. I could probably revisit some of those podcasts and say, hey, can I talk about the book now? And things like that. But and then, you know, on the other hand, it's almost like identifying like, hey, who are people that I really want to read the book that I can just give the book to and hope that turns, you know, it's like a business card that I'm sending. You know, that's a different. So I don't tend to make a bunch of money from the book sales itself, but I do want it to get seen and read and recognized for the other things that the book supports, right? So
you have a list
thoughts on like starting to think through the marketing plan stuff and really put some structure to that.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a list of specific people you want to read your book?
No, not yet.
So that's something to think about, is just making a spreadsheet of, if I could dream and pick the people I want to read my book, who would that be? And maybe you start out with a type of person, and then you have to figure out who are the people who match that type. But it's, if there are, for example, if you want to get speaking gigs, then you would want to send your book out to event organizers. If you want to get corporate consulting gigs, you would try to figure out who hires the corporate consultants to come in and speak and train, and how do I make a list of those people? If it's, I want to get CEOs reading this book so that they push it down through their organization, or engineering leads, who are those people? And can you make a list of those people, like some of those top people, and especially influencers in the space? Like who, if you wanted to go after engineering leads, who are the engineering leads who are really active on social media and they talk a lot? And if you send them a book, they're likely to share that book with their audience. And if you can make a list of those people, then those are the people that I would definitely just proactively send a book to. Also, journalists. Are there industry publications? Are there organizations that put out a magazine or a newsletter or something? And is there a way that you can send the book to those people and they might put it in the newsletter or magazine?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For sure. And some of those might be paid if I really wanted to pay, but sometimes they'll just do that too. Yeah. Okay.
And then
So
did you see
just
my
start with the list.
newsletter? Did you see my newsletter the other day about how to get reviews? I just
I
sent it out.
did see that. Yeah. So yeah, like
So that,
quid pro quo, but you were suggesting some ways that were as close to that as you could get.
right.
Without breaking the rules.
Right. Yeah. So making that list too of people that you can send the book to get those reviews up quickly so you can get to that 20 review point as fast as you can. And there are also,
Does the speed from published to 20 reviews matter? Or like if I
just the
like,
sooner the better, because everybody who hits your book page who sees less than 20 reviews, it's not so much a conscious thing, it's almost more of a subconscious thing that people see that and they're just like, oh, well, I don't want to be first. I don't want to be like the one who reads this book first and reviews it. Like people want to go on, they want to jump on a bandwagon.
right.
And if they see, oh, this book has at least 20 reviews, then they feel like they're jumping on a bandwagon. There's trust there. And so getting to that 20 is just breaking that barrier so that people feel a little bit more comfortable saying, hey, people are reading this book, so it's probably good. And the higher you can get that, the faster, the better, because then you get that many more people seeing your book with lots of reviews, and it feeds itself. It becomes a positively reinforcing cycle.
Yeah. And does Amazon know much or care other than like a verified review where they can see that someone ordered it and then reviewed it?
I wouldn't worry about verified versus unverified. Verified's better, but if you can send a PDF out to a bunch of people and then they go and review it and then it's not going to show up as verified, that's still good, because the main thing we're going after are people, and all they see is how many reviews are there. They're not looking at whether they're verified or unverified.
Yeah. Or like if everyone in my family, all my siblings and their spouses, just like review my freaking book, and that gets me a few right there. Just to do a guy a favor. So.
Yeah. Just be careful about the last name stuff. Like, don't make it too obvious. You don't want 10 reviews all from people with the last name Perry.
Yeah. Yeah. But sisters with different last names might be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Virginia, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry I'm late.
No worries. No need to apologize. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
I think we've kind of gone through everybody else's questions. So if you've got anything, Virginia, then I'd love to hear from you. How are things coming along for you?
Okay. I guess I had one question. I think the other one was the one I missed was about Amazon and getting on. But the other thing I wondered about was lists. And I read someplace something like reconnect or reconvent, or that you had suggested as a good source of making a big list.
Let's see. Now you're putting me on the spot. I'm trying to remember, but it's not, the synapses are not connecting.
Okay.
But what kind of lists are you talking about getting on?
Well, I wanted to just improve my lists, and I guess I can add a few questions to this and show my ignorance. I wanted to, like, for example, in LinkedIn, what's the difference between following and being connected?
Mm-hmm.
And I got some sort of a warning as I was doing it about being careful to know that there were people that I trusted and that stuff.
Yeah, don't worry about that warning. The only warning you need to worry about, well, and you don't really need to worry about it, but if you make too many connections, then you'll run into a warning where they'll say you're bumping up against your limit. You're limited to, it'll say 125 or something connections per week. And what they'll do when you hit the cap is you just can't send out any more connection requests. So it's a warning, but you don't really need to be careful because they're going to lock you down and prevent you from sending out more requests until the next week as soon as you hit that limit. But so I wouldn't worry about any warnings that you get. The difference between following and connecting is if you follow somebody, then their posts will show up in your feed, but you're not directly connected to them. And LinkedIn is really pushing this following thing versus connecting. And so if you connect, you can send messages back and forth without using up your in-mail quota, or sometimes people don't allow you to send them a message unless you're connected. And so it's better to be connected to somebody if you want to communicate with them. But if you just want their content and you don't really care about communicating with them, then you can just follow them. And of course, on the other side, you want as many people following you as possible, because the more people who follow you, the more people see your posts, see your content, and then you have more influence and you can impact people more.
Okay, so they they suggested that you follow somebody before you connect.
Yeah, they suggest that. Again, they're trying to push the following thing. I don't think LinkedIn will ever do this, but it's possible that in the future they would just get rid of connections and you would just have followers. I don't think they'll do that, but it's almost like they're pushing people in that direction.
Why is that beneficial to them? Just to have everybody following everybody and no one can communicate?
Well, you'd still be able to communicate, but there would be limitations. So you wouldn't be able to there's a problem with the connection side of things, which is there's a spam problem on LinkedIn. And so a lot of people are getting a lot of spam on LinkedIn, which doesn't get solved by removing the connection thing, but it can potentially reduce some of the issues with connections, or I mean with spam, if they got rid of connections. Again, I don't think they'll do this, but it seems like they're encouraging more following, which allows them to filter out spam a little bit more.
Now, if you're thank you. Now, if you're communicating in your in mail, is that more private than when you do it, or is all of that shown too?
If you send somebody an in-mail, or if you're connected and you send them a message, it's more or less the same thing. It's just as private as the other. If you just post on LinkedIn and communicate, then of course it'd be public, but your in-mails or your messages to somebody are always private.
Thank you, because that was kind of confusing to me. And I'm getting a lot more people wanting to be on my in my LinkedIn, whatever it is, to just connecting with me on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, the more connections you get, the more people want to connect with you.
Because they want to raise their connections?
They want to raise their connections. Also, it gives them a larger network of second connections or people that they are connected to through somebody else. And so the more people you're connected to, the larger your overall network on LinkedIn. And that's worth something to people. And so if you're connected to a lot of people, so if you're connected to 10,000 people and somebody connects to you, all of a sudden, they just added all those 10,000 people that you're connected become their second connections if they weren't already, or second degree connections.
Gotcha.
And so, and then you take that to an entirely different level if you connect to somebody who has 20,000 or 30,000 connections.
That must have been what happened, because I had a couple of big connections and so other people, and then all of a sudden I was getting more. That's what happened. Okay, I was curious to know what happened.
Yeah. And if you connect to somebody who has like 500,000 followers, if you're connected to them, you don't get all those people in your network. But if you post something and that other person with that huge following comments on your post, likes your post, does anything with your post to interact, their entire following of 500,000 people aren't going to see that, but a percentage of them are going to see that interaction with you. And then that becomes outsized visibility for your content.
Thank you. And thank you, by the way, for all the good content we're getting from you. I'm amazed really at how generous you're being with all the, all the things you're sending us.
Well, it all comes back to me. I like to give, but I get just as much as I give.
I want to second that. Very appreciative.
How are you today?
Great.
All right. Well, we're hitting the top of the hour, so I think if there aren't any more questions, we'll go into our accountability time.
Can I just ask one more question?
Yeah.
Kind of
Yep.
on the marketing side of things. So I see a lot of books that I guess this is more about like the call to action from the book, right? Like I see plenty of books that have go to this website, get the corresponding resources or tools. You can go download the PDF or whatever, and it gets you on the email list and things. Do you have and I haven't created anything there. I intend to, but I'm just curious. And then I've got a whole bunch of like take action stuff, and Bryn was suggesting, hey, maybe you actually create a companion like printed workbook for this instead of just a digital one. I was intending on just putting some stuff in digital form. Just curious what pros and cons and thoughts are to how to have this call to action and how important it would be to have another printed workbook thing. That it almost seems like it's a whole other thing I have to sell that may or may not matter much, trying to or if I just want it to be used as like, hey, go get the digital thing to get on my email list, and then we can interact there. But thoughts on that?
Well, let's talk about the email list first. It's
Yeah.
really easy to set up, and your email list is so valuable that I would make it really easy for people to get on your email list. And I would give something away that's of great enough value that it's a no-brainer for them to give up their email address and get on your list. You'll never be sorry about growing an email list, even if it's small, even if it's 100 people. But so much the better if it's 500 or 1,000 or 5,000 people. It's the power of your email list. I can't overemphasize enough. So anything you can do to grow that and promote that email list is going to come back to you for years and years. And as far as the workbook goes, you could create the workbook as a giveaway and say, hey, sign up on my email list and I'll give you a PDF version of my workbook. You could have a printed version of it that's available as a companion to your book. I wouldn't see it as something that, hey, now I have to sell this workbook. I'd see it more as, is the workbook valuable to your audience? If they're reading the book and you had a workbook, is that something that would naturally fit where they would say, oh, that's exactly where I need, because as I'm going through Jeff's book, I keep wanting to write stuff down, but there's this workbook that's going to make it easy for me to follow the prompts and write stuff down and create this record and then act on those things that I write down. If you feel like the workbook would really be helpful in getting people to act and do something and then feel the benefit of your content, then maybe it's worth it to put that workbook out there. If you feel, you don't want to create something that's just, hey, I can create this and then maybe I can sell it to a bunch of people and then I can make a little more money. Because again, you're not making money off the sales of the book, and you're definitely not going to make money off the sales of the workbook. But if it's really helpful and it gets people to act, and then they like your content that much more because of the workbook, and they're that much more likely to hire you as a consultant or speaker or trainer or whatever it is that you want to get out of this. If it's going to help that, well, then it's definitely useful.
Yeah.
I created a workbook because I was doing these calls and I was doing consulting, and I kept answering the same questions over and over and over and over again. So I was like, I have got to create a workbook. I need to create that workbook because I can put better answers in the workbook than I can remember in my head. I can actually go do the research and put it all together. And then I can just tell people, go read the workbook. And then I can spend my time answering the more specific questions, how to apply those things to somebody's specific circumstances, rather than answering the same questions over and over again. So for me, it was a necessity to create a workbook. For you, it might be helpful, and it might help people connect with your content, but maybe it's not as much of a necessity. And if it's not a necessity at all, and it's not that helpful, then I would skip it.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, Bryn's kind of thinking about that because another client she's working with right now has a book and a workbook that he's putting out. So it's kind of forefront in her mind. And so I think she saw your book and she's like, hey, he could put out a workbook just as well as this other client I'm working with.
At minimum, I think it'll be a digital set of things that they can go and download and whatever. Whether or not I get that into another printed thing is, I'm trying to figure that out.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? All right. Well, we'll go into the accountability time. For those of you who want to stick around and do accountability hour and work together on our books, we'll go on mute and everybody will just work away. But you're free to leave anytime or to chime back in with more questions if you have more questions. So I'll go on mute too, and we'll see you guys next week.